We're like a ship that's being buffeted by extremely turbulent and stormy weather. The waves are cascading, tossing us from one side to the next. And that's why to say that we are on an even keel right now would obviously be premature.
A naked man has little to no influence on society. In clothes like this, you step out and you know that you're going to turn heads. You know that you're going to create an impression of a person who cares deeply about the way they look and has a finer eye for detail. And, that seems to be the Bombay Shirt Company way. What I really love about these clothes, and I really mean this, is this looks like a man has walked into the room. I like that. It's nice.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. President Trump's decision to increase the H-1B visa fee to $100,000 is a devastating blow to Indians whose dream is to find a rewarding job in America. It's also the third whammy in the last few weeks. The first was the 50% tariffs, and the second, the revocation of the sanctions waiver on the Chabahar port in Iran. And it's possible that restrictions on student visas could be the fourth. So today we ask, where does this leave India-US relations? My guest is former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and Chairman of the Parliamentary Standing Committee, Shashi Tharoor. Shashi Tharoor, President Trump has increased the H-1B visa fee from around $2,000 to $100,000, and this could be a devastating blow to India. 71% of H-1B visas go to Indians, and the Hindustan Times has estimated that of the 4.1 million visas issued since 1997, 2.5 million have gone to Indians. So let me start by asking you, how do you view this step?
Well, it's, I think, in many ways, a reflection of Mr. Trump's leadership of the MAGA movement, which, as you know, has been rather hostile to immigration, and particularly to what one might call the visible immigrants, the people of color who are in increasingly dominant positions in many places. And he is pandering to that constituency. It is also linked, I think, to his conviction that essentially the H-1B visa has been used to hire more cheaply foreign workers to do jobs that Americans could do if they were paid a fair American wage. In other words, that an Indian might come in and do a job for $60,000 a year that an American would expect at least 80 or 85 for, and therefore the companies are trying to nickel and dime the American professional by hiring foreigners. Now, we don't know if the supposition is right, but his assumption is that if by making it expensive, he can keep that kind of worker off the H-1B entry route, that perhaps only the truly inaccessible talents, the ones who come on top dollars, will be the only ones imported into America, and for the rest, American citizens already in the country, therefore, would be the ones getting these jobs that will now be denied to Indians and others. Now, this assumption, for example, requires America to have an adequate pool of people to do all these jobs. And since my understanding is America doesn't have enough engineering graduates and software professionals and all of these other things to do this kind of work, the net result of Mr. Trump's decision is more likely to be that some of the jobs currently being done in the US will instead be outsourced to the branches of these companies in England and Ireland and maybe even France and Germany and maybe even more to India. And therefore, it will turn out to be a bit of an own goal for Mr. Trump. That seems to be the smart analysis coming out of Washington and Silicon Valley.
That may well happen, but it will take a while before it does, if it does. Meanwhile, the truth is that this is the third whammy to hit India in the last few weeks. The first was the 50% tariffs. The second was the revocation of the Chabahar sanctions waiver. What impact will all of this have on India-US relations?
Well, India-US relations are already reeling from the somewhat contradictory signals we've received in the course of 2025. As you remember, Mr. Modi was the fourth, I think, head of state or government to visit Mr. Trump after his inauguration in February. The meeting seemed to have gone well. It ended with the two leaders announcing that they were embarking on trade negotiations that were going to conclude in the fall. Many of us thought that meant that we had successfully bought time on the question of any tariffs being imposed on us, where Mr. Trump had already signaled his determination to impose what he called reciprocal tariffs in various countries, but we were negotiating till the fall, so we had time to work out a deal, etc. Then, of course, the first blow was when the tariffs were announced. Without waiting for the outcome of those negotiations, we were slapped with 25%, which unfortunately hurt us much more than any of us had bargained for, because it actually put us at a significant disadvantage against our own competitors in the kinds of labor-intensive industries which export to the US. Garments, for example. Tirupur in Coimbatore near Coimbatore is reeling from the shock. Some factories even contemplating closure because garment manufacturers from Southeast Asia are all at between 15 and 19% and don't have, therefore, the 6% premium that Indian garment manufacturers have. Surat has laid off 135,000 workers in the gem and jewelry business. Vishakhapatnam, which absolutely is the center of our marine products, seafood, and particularly shrimp exports. And they, by the way, export something like 60% of their exports to the States. They suddenly find that their products are no longer viable in the American marketplace. So already that first 25% was very bad news. And it is having a real impact on Indians in ways that have even hit the Prime Minister's home state through Surat. So suddenly you had this setback to Indo-US relations, and the next setback was the 25% being slapped on us because of our willingness or our desire to buy Russian oil and gas. That second 25% essentially took something like $48 billion out of the $87 billion that we exported to the US last year, essentially off the table. The remainder covers issues that are not yet subject to these tariffs and sanctions, pharmaceuticals, for example. And there is talk now that some of these things are also under the anvil for review in America, I beg your pardon. Apple iPhones, for example, are not subject to 50%. There's some talk of some of the electronic components that are made in India and sent off to American companies also so far not being sanctioned. But even that second 25% then is now putting a large chunk of our exports beyond the pale. This is a very painful low blow, accompanied by some rather insulting rhetoric, as you may remember, Karan, with the president saying that he said the Indian economy is dead. He doesn't care if it goes down the drain with the Russian ones. His aide, Mr. Navarro, called us a laundromat for Russia, described the Ukraine war as Modi's war, which is a leap of the imagination that really would have been untenable in an 8th grade classroom. But you've got all of this stuff coming with it. Then you've had, after Mr. Trump tweets that we've lost Russia and India to deepest, darkest China, suddenly he comes around and says, no, we've got a good relationship. Mr. Modi is my friend. He calls him on his birthday. There's again an exchange of conciliatory tweets between the two countries. And an American trade delegation, which was supposed to come on the 25th of August and canceled its visit, suddenly got restored and showed up, as you remember, at the beginning of last week. So suddenly you've got very conflicting signals. which is why a simple answer to the question, where do Indo-US relations stand, is difficult to give for today. In the larger term, in the longer term and the larger perspective, I would argue that there are still a lot of fundamentals in favor of a good relationship. There has been a sensible, constructive, and evolving defense partnership, including joint exercises, a lot of agreements on mutual cooperation, logistics support, and so on. There's been very advanced negotiations on India buying some advanced American weaponry not previously available to us, including the Striker armored vehicle and the Javelin anti-tank missile, which I'm told has only not gone through because of the shock of the tariffs, but that's very much on the anvil. There's been a lot of work going on below the radar, as it were, in a number of other sectors of cooperation. And there is still fundamentals like the Global Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, where we don't have any major geopolitical quarrels with the US on many major issues. And at the same time, the almost 4-point-something million diaspora of Indian origin in America, who are disproportionately prosperous and therefore influential as voters, donors, campaigners, and even now as political leaders and staffers. So all of these factors still argue in favor of a long-term good relationship with the US. In the short term, we're like a ship that's being buffeted by extremely turbulent and stormy weather. The waves are cascading, tossing us from one side to the next. And that's why to say that we are on an even keel right now would obviously be premature.
The sad truth, however, Shashi Tharoor, is despite that fairly devastating toll that we've already taken, more is still to come. The US Homeland Security Secretary has said she intends to restrict student visas to just 4 years. And given that Indians constitute the single biggest cohort of foreign students in America, that would be another severe blow, wouldn't it? And on top of that, there is talk of a remittance tax, which, if it goes through, could seriously damage remittances to India. So we have a fourth and a fifth whammy waiting in the wings to hit us if they happen.
Okay, on the fourth whammy, Karan, by itself, it's not that much of a problem, because the reason the 4 years is a blow is that many of our students wanted to stay on and work in the status that they were permitted to once they've graduated from American institutions, and then qualify for the H-1B. But if the H-1B itself is no longer accessible to most of them, they would have to come back anyway or move to other countries. So as a result, we've already witnessed a decline in student applications for the current academic year. And you will be certain that when the final numbers come in, Indian students in America in the current academic year, that is September 25 to June of 26, will be significantly lower than the cohort that went to America September 24 in the current academic year. That will be lower already. And once this new rule comes in, it'll drop even further still. So again, America is depriving itself of Indian student talent, but that's fine because other countries are welcoming them. It's very, very interesting the way in which Europe is rolling out the red carpet for Indian students in Germany and France, as well as, of course, the other Anglophone countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and even Ireland are attracting Indian students too. So I don't think that is such a big blow to the Indian student community. Those that want to go abroad have other options, and those who wanted to go abroad to America because they thought they'd stay on and work there, know now with the H-1B business that they're not going to be able to work there anymore. The question of remittances has a loophole, Karan. The bulk of our remittances from America actually come from Indians of an earlier generation who are already American citizens and who have maintained ties to India. The immigrants who are not American citizens are the only ones who are affected by the remittance restriction. And that's not, if I'm not mistaken, that's already announced policy. I don't know, maybe the rules to implement it have not been announced, but the policy has been announced. And I'm told that the damage in terms of numbers is not as considerable as you might worry. First of all, remittances from the US and Europe are actually much less than from the Gulf. It's the poor, hardworking, blue-collar construction worker in Dubai who's sending the bulk of his earnings home to support his family. rather than the wealthy professional doctor in America, many of whom in any case have brought their families with them and have no one to remit money to. So the numbers are again not bad. So that your fourth and fifth whammies worry me very much less than the first three whammies. But the first three whammies are serious. And you're quite right that in the famous American expression of the triple whammy, a triple whammy is all it takes to constitute a considerable setback. But as I say, and I've argued this in some of my writings, Karan, we need to play the long innings. We have to take.
I'll come to that in a moment's time. But before I come to how we should respond to the situation, i.e. the long innings that you have in mind, let me ask you a question that many are asking themselves. Is President Trump deliberately targeting India? Has he turned against India? What's your answer to that very commonly asked question?
I think it's very difficult to answer because Mr. Trump is a law unto himself, Karan. I think the person who claims to be able to either understand Mr. Trump fully or predict his next move hasn't yet been born unless he's the one married to him, because I honestly can't think of anyone else other than the remarkable Mrs. Trump who has been able to have a long sustained relationship. Look at the fact, for example, that all the people who surrounded Mr. Trump in his first administration are not only out of favor, but are amongst his critics, including his own national security advisor, Mr. Bolton. If you look at the personal friendships that Mr. Trump has managed to shed along the way, including the egregious Mr. Musk. I mean, it's very difficult to say that Mr. Trump is anything but a mercurial figure whose motives, understand, etc., can't be easily analyzed. I have heard all the theories that I'm sure you've heard. There are many such theories, including a newfound fondness for Pakistan. But at the same time, I would say that Mr. Trump is equally capable, to use another American expression, of turning on a dime. And the call to Mr. Modi suggests that he is willing to see some merit in rekindling the bromance that seemed to have died a few months ago.
Except that shortly after that call to Mr. Modi, literally 3 days later, he imposed the $100,000 penalty fee on the H-1B visa. So
on the same day as his tweet about Mr. Modi and his call, he urged the Europeans to slap 100% sanctions on India for trading with Russia.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult to find a simple pattern of analysis.
In which case, let me ask you this, and you hinted at it in one of your earlier answers in this interview. Is there a streak of racism in what's happening?
Well, I wouldn't accuse Mr. Trump of racism in the sense that he's a man who's known to have had friends of all races and so on. I'm not sure that's a fair thing to say to him. But the movement he heads is certainly, to a great degree, animated by what I would politely call anti-immigrant prejudice. You can call it racism if you like, because certainly a lot of the immigrants who are objected to are the ones who are visibly not born of European stock. And therefore, they're the ones who get the brunt of some of the criticisms, attacks, and other things that we're seeing in America these days, Karan. But I will say that when I was asking myself and others why the fabled Indian diaspora has been so silent in the face of Mr. Trump's attacks on India, the answer I got was a very credible one. They're now, for the first time, afraid for themselves. They're afraid of their own place in American society, their own welcome in American society for the first time. This had been a very welcoming society, an inclusive society, one where it was politically incorrect to be anti-immigrant. Suddenly now, in the rejection of what was called wokeism and political correctness, it is now almost fashionable to be hostile to immigrants, and it's certainly politically the way in which a significant section of Mr. Trump's political base is going. And his willingness to pander to that lies behind some of these decisions we've talked about.
In which case, what can we expect from the trade negotiations which will resume in Washington later this week? Piyush Goyal, as you know, left earlier today for Washington. But what can we expect from that visit?
Well, I think the trade negotiations are about the first 25%. And that is, we are making a very serious and determined effort to get the American professional trade negotiators to understand both our opportunities and our constraints and end up once again on a more or less even keel with our principal competitors in Asia, that is somewhere between 15 and 19, at worst case 20%. Anything more than that makes a whole lot of industries unviable. But the second 25% is not on the table. That is a political decision. It's not really a tariff, it's a sanction. So the first 25% is what Piyush Goyal's delegation is there to negotiate. And I'm reasonably confident and optimistic, including based on the briefings I've had in my committee from the Commerce Secretary, that there is hope, there is reason for hope that we can find enough common ground to come to a conclusion that would reduce that first 25% of
Can I
tax.
interrupt and ask, you believe there is reason for hope, even though we seem to be determined not to admit GM corn into India, not to admit American dairy produce because of the feed that is given into India? Those seem to be red lines as far as the Americans are concerned. And since there's no give on the Indian side, are you still reasonably confident?
I'm told they're looking at every single sector. There are an awful lot of tariff lines in India, and we can possibly show and demonstrate a lot of give on areas that are politically less sensitive for us. If America wants to sell us more Cadillacs, I don't see how many Indians are going to buy them and why it should matter. Why should we tax or impose high tariff duties on Cadillacs? Maybe we can, in fact, import a certain amount of GM corn or corn or soy for fuel making purposes. You know that ethanol blending is a major priority now. We're trying to learn to blend ethanol with diesel, and that's something that we can certainly use corn stock for, and it wouldn't matter if it was GM corn. There are areas of give that are still possible. How many Indians can afford to buy Kraft cheese, my dear Karan? We're not talking about something that's going to swamp the market. I don't think Amul needs to fear for its business if we give some modest concessions on some areas. I really
But
do think...
wouldn't Kraft cheese come up against the dietary concerns we have? American cows are fed on a feed that we find difficult to accept in India for religious reasons. Unless they're prepared to make concessions there, Kraft cheese is out of the market, even though it may not be a desirable thing to have.
There are two ways we can deal with that. One is America does have products that are labeled as not being fed on animal stock. And some of those could be exported to India. The second thing is we could also ask for strict labeling of products where the Indian buyer would have the discernment to decide how important it was to them that the milk from which that Kraft cheese is made was produced by cows that hadn't had any animal feed. Now, the question is, we're talking about a very small market, Karan, and I don't think we're talking about abolition of tariffs. If we are currently imposing 250% on Kraft and we suddenly bring it down to 30, given the production costs of the Kraft cheese in America, in any case, it is going to be so much more expensive than Amul or any Indian brand that the Indian brands will constantly outsell. I'm reminded of some of the debates we went through when McDonald's was going to come into India. McDonald's has not swamped masala doshas and chole bhature and pani puri because the quantities, the price differential, all of these mean that they're appealing to a restricted market. I think that we need to show a certain amount of maturity and flexibility, and I believe I have understood that our trade negotiators are going in a spirit of flexibility because there are fundamental issues at stake for industries where we really want to be able to compete with Thailand and Bangladesh and Vietnam and Indonesia and so on, that we can't compete with if we don't show some concessions on these tariff lines.
Okay. Let me then ask you a different question, but one that's probably as important, if not more, to the political relationship between India and America. Do you expect Trump to come for the India summit of Quad? And if he doesn't come, and the New York Times says at the moment he has no plans of coming, what message will that send?
Yeah, I think that is a very serious issue for Washington to determine. And at the moment, all bets are off because, as you say, informed sources in the American media say that he's not planning to come. On the contrary, he is planning a visit to East Asia to possibly link up somewhere with Mr. Xi Jinping instead, which will send a very strong signal that the very premises on the basis of which the Quad has been built up so far have ceased to operate for Mr. Trump. In other words, the message that India will receive loud and clear is that the relationship between Washington and Beijing is more important to Mr. Trump than this development of a counterbalancing quadrilateral dialogue. Now, we have to wait and see whether this speculation is warranted. It may well be that they will simply arrange a different mutually convenient date if coming in November is not feasible for Mr. Trump. We don't know. There is nothing hard and fast about the date of the Quad Summit. It was always something, and every Quad Summit has always been something that is set up according to the mutual convenience of the four participants. And don't forget the Quad foreign ministers are meeting, and if I'm not mistaken, will meet in New York, where our foreign minister is landing today. So, I mean, I think that there is still a process ongoing that the American administration has not repudiated. But yes, if Mr. Trump chooses not to come, it will send a signal that may not be what perhaps Washington intended when the Quad was set up, devised, and gradually elevated from a working level gathering of joint secretary level people to a foreign minister level and then to a summit level. So it's been given a certain prominence in Washington's view of the Indo-Pacific that it will suddenly lose if Mr. Trump bails out on it.
Let's tie the different knots together. Do we have a crisis in Indo-US relations?
I would say we went through what one might call a temporary crisis, which has been partly calmed down by some of the conciliatory tweets, languages, the restoration of the trade dialogue, and so on and so forth. So I think, as far as I'm aware, Karan, there's enough grounds for thinking that we are not as badly off as we were, let's say, at the end of August, when crisis would not have been an inappropriate word to use. But we are not fully out of the woods yet. I'm sorry if I seem to be hedging my language, but the truth of the matter is this situation is so fraught with uncertainties that you can't just give a simple, straightforward thing. This is where my whole argument about us taking the longer view comes in. What are our interests, Karan? We have fundamental interests in the world as a country that is still embarked on a long-term process of development, of actually finding for our people a decent standing in the world that will enable them to lead self-respecting lives. That is a bigger project than any one moment, one crisis, one issue should be allowed to get us to deviate from. And when I speak of playing the long innings, I know I'm not being Chinese and talking about the 200-year horizon or the 1,000-year horizon. I am talking about things within our lifetimes. But even within our lifetimes, we can't just afford to write off the US relationship in a momentary fit of pique.
But then what do we do?
We have to bide our time, and I think the government so far has been fairly measured and sensible in its responses. But at the same time, we have to be very firm in the stands we take. And I think it's important for us as a country to signal very clearly. For example, we do have a sovereign right not to be told by any other country what to do. We will buy what we want to buy, where we want to buy it, but we will make that decision, and not because somebody tells us to. Now, we may one day calculate that it's no longer to our advantage to buy from a certain source, but that's a calculation we must make. And I think that sort of thing, if we are firm on and stick to our guns, even at the cost of some belt tightening and paying a price, then that is a cost, that is a price that the other side will learn India is prepared to pay and will respect us all the more for it. So we neither cave in, nor do we turn around and insult them back. We show the maturity that so far we have shown in the face of all of these provocations. If we come sadly to the conclusion that the relationship has turned a corner in the wrong direction irretrievably, then we adjust our sails accordingly. In any case, we multiply our options now. When it comes to markets, we should be diversifying our markets colossally. We should be moving to conclude the Indo-European Free Trade Agreement. We should be developing our political links with Europe as an alternative pole to the US in the Western world. We have already got the UK Free Trade Agreement, great. And we should certainly keep open the lines of communication to China and Russia, which themselves have gotten much closer to each other than we would have otherwise welcomed. but we now have to make our peace with all of these new circumstances. But that doesn't mean we should write off the US overnight.
You know, you said our relationship with the US was of crisis proportions. In August, you said you wouldn't deny that the word crisis applied towards the end of August. Since then, you said it's partly calmed down. But given what's been happening on the H-1B visa front, do you really believe it's calmed down? Or do you fear that the H-1B visa might be the start of an attempt to try and attack the services relationship that India has with America? The trade relationship has already been attacked.
Well, you know, there are some things that American companies can do, whatever an administration's policies are. You've seen the so-called global capability centers in India, which have grown from next to nothing in the last decade to rather significant elements of these American companies' strategy. I genuinely believe that this H-1B decision is not going to hurt us that badly if companies decide to do two things. One is to strengthen the number of global capability centers in India doing work, which it's impossible for the Americans to tax or otherwise punitively punish because it's going to come online to them anyway. And the other possibilities, things that require the physical presence of individuals, offshore that work to friendly countries that Trump won't sanction, like the UK, like Europe, and so on. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, we would simply be in a position where the kinds of money we were making out of America, we will make out of elsewhere, including out of our own country. My friend Amitabh Kant has a very interesting tweet out in which he argues that that Indian companies should now actually start doing the kinds of things they used to go to America to do here in India. And he may well be right. So let's not be doomsayers about this H-1B thing. It's a blow. It was unexpected. It will hurt some individuals in the short term and some companies in the short term. But there are medium-term responses which may actually strengthen our hands in the long run. Let's not allow ourselves to constantly feel that we're the victims in this exercise.
My last question. Can India-US relations recover during the remaining 3 years and 4 months of Trump's presidency? The vast majority of his presidency, as you know, lies ahead of him. Or do we have to wait for his successor?
No. I think, first of all, if Mr. Trump is unpredictable, he remains unpredictable in a good sense as well as a bad one. If he could be unpredictable in a negative direction for us earlier this year, he might turn out to be unpredictably positive to us in the months and years ahead. So,
shows no signs of that at the moment.
So precisely the thing is that Mr. Trump has not been someone who has been easy for anyone to analyze or predict the actions of. Barring a few broad trends, including this broad anti-immigration thing, this bringing jobs back to America idea, and so on. By the way, some of these things he's going to discover the actual impact for himself. Tariffs, for example, will inevitably drive up prices for the American consumer. And it will happen before the midterm elections of 2026. In November, Mr. Trump may get a rather rude shock when his opponents or his party's opponents campaign on the fact that the average American is paying more for goods they took for granted because of Mr. Trump's policies.
That has certainly been the hope, but up till now, American inflation is actually not rising at all. They're
very good reasons.
That economists are rethinking their belief that Trump's tariffs will drive up inflation. It hasn't happened, and there are no signs it might not.
No, Karan, you haven't got that one right, because what has happened is they've explained why inflation has not been affected this year by the simple fact that when Trump started telegraphing his intention to do tariffs, everybody dramatically increased their imports and stocks. So the first half of the year, if you look at the exports, even from India to America, our exports were higher in the first half of this year than in the corresponding first half of the previous year, because everyone said, we don't know what tariffs are coming. Let's export right now while the tariffs aren't there. And there were huge orders, including, by the way, of Apple iPhones and everything else. All sorts of things were shipped off to America in far larger quantities than before. That's why the American consumer has so far been buffered until all those stocks are spent. But they will eventually run out. Others, including the importers who have been absorbing perhaps some of the shock, will say we can't absorb any more. And in the course of the final quarter of this year, and the first half of next year, you will see inflation on most of these goods if these policies aren't changed. So there may be political reasons why Mr. Trump may have to change his approach too. So that's why I said, let's play the long game. There are things here that will still take some time to play out.
All right. The only thing about the long game is that in the long run, we're all dead. But never mind. Let's hope there is life ahead.
Our country will survive, Karan. India will live, and India will survive this experience. Thank you very much. Good talking to you.
Thank you, Shashi. Thank you very much for the time you've given me. Take care. Stay safe.
Jai Hind.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
A naked man has little to no influence on society. In clothes like this, you step out and you know that you're going to turn heads. You know that you're going to create an impression of a person who cares deeply about the way they look and has a finer eye for detail. And, you know, that seems to be the Bombay Shirt Company way. What I really love about these clothes, and I really mean this, is this looks like a man has walked into the room. I like that. You know, it's nice.